Today, we've gathered leaders in fusion energy to discuss the path to commercialization of this potentially transformational energy technology. I want to make a personal note. I had the unbelievable opportunity, and some of my staff with me, to go to ITER in France, and it's kind of changed who I am and what I think that we can do, and as civilization on this earth, what we can maybe calm down a little bit and treat each other a little nicer, because we're not fighting over something we don't have to fight over anymore, which is energy. So a lot of promise and hope. This March, as I said, I was fortunate enough to visit the International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor at ITER, located in southern France, and was graciously provided a tour by Dr. Lewis. And thank you for making the effort to be here. We made accommodations any way we could have to have you on virtual and all that, but you made that effort, and that speaks a lot. It was my first tour of the fusion facility, and it left me profoundly reflective of the potential of the technology to transform our energy future. Touring a facility dedicated to international scientific and engineering collaboration among our geopolitical rivals, including Russia, including China, they still paying? And allies, helps restore faith in what we can do together, given so much conflict at present. This project was initiated in 1985 during the Cold War between President Reagan and General Secretary Gorbachev to develop fusion energy for peaceful purposes. The promise of technology and the collaborative approach of nations provides a model for technology innovation and competition without conflict by focusing on data transparency and mutual benefits. The visit left me hopeful that we will be able to meet the challenges of climate change and overcome our internal and external political pettiness to improve people's lives at home and abroad. Domestically, fusion research is at a critical inflection point. Private fusion companies are preparing to demonstrate their technologies. Our national labs have hit significant milestones, and private capital has been generously invested in the promise of technology. The Fusion Energy Science Advisory Committee and the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine released reports last year providing a clear set of recommendations for commercialization. The Department of Energy Office of Science and National Labs continue to advance research through advanced computing for predictive and modeling capabilities needed for sustainable fusions, while also enhancing existing facilities and planning for the next generation of material and approaches. The White House Office of Science and Technology Policy has similarly spearheaded a high-level commitment to fusion energy, and our committee's members and colleagues in the Senate and House have championed historic new legislation and investment in the past 4 years. To further support and direct fusion and plasma research and development, Congress passed the Energy Act of 2020, the CHIPS and Science Act of 2022, the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. These legislations provides direction to DOE to fully support the U.S. contribution to ITER, pursue innovative fusion concepts, and establish a milestone-based development program to design and build a pilot fusion plant. In addition, these bills will bring to fruition the experimental capabilities that we need to advance fusion research, including the material plasma exposure experiment facility managed by Oak Ridge National Lab. This facility will help us understand the material capabilities required in high heat environments. It also provides upgrades to meet research needs for understanding physical and chemical changes to plasmas and fundamental themselves in exploring new regimes of dense material physics, astrophysics, planetary physics, and short pulse laser plasma interactions. Most importantly, $280 million has been made available for fusion science construction and additional funds for science lab infrastructure that will help accelerate projects such as the Princeton Plasma Innovation Center. The legislative activity this committee has led and is an essential step for the federal stewardship of this vital technology and the many components and materials that make up its supply chain. It is a step made in concert with the research and growing business communities, and it is one made amid increasing competition around the world. For me, fusion provides a vision of and potential pathway toward world peace. So I look forward to hearing from our witnesses on how they are involved in bringing this exciting technology to fruition. With that, I'm going to turn to my friend Senator Barrasso for his opening remarks.
Well, thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for holding this very important hearing today. You know, there's that old saying about fusion. They say that it's 30 years away and always will be, but I believe that's no longer the case. The innovators are working to move us beyond fusion science. working to demonstrate usable fusion energy. And we still have a long way to go, but I believe, Mr. Chairman, we are turning the corner. In March, the White House hosted a summit on commercial fusion energy. In the wake of the summit, one of our witnesses, Dr. Cowley, was quoted in Newsweek saying, "I believe that we could have fusion electricity by the end of the 2030s. There were also been recent reports highlights the steps needed to harness fusion energy. These reports included a 2021 study from the National Academies of Science titled Bringing Fusion to the U.S. Grid. This hearing is going to help us better understand what's needed to commercialize this technology. We've enjoyed the benefits of nuclear energy for more than half a century. Today's nuclear energy, called nuclear fission, is generated when we split a uranium atom. Nuclear fusion energy takes the opposite approach. Fusion energy is generated when elements such as hydrogen are combined. This is the process that powers the sun. It's also how dozens of elements of the periodic table are created. English physicist Arthur Eddington first theorized the existence of nuclear fusion over 100 years ago. But unlike nuclear fission, we have not been able to generate electricity from fusion energy. The Department of Energy leads the federal government's efforts to develop nuclear fusion energy. The Fusion Energy Sciences Program is managed from the Offices of Science. This program remains largely focused on basic scientific research. The department's National Nuclear Security Administration supports another type of fusion technology. Specifically, the National Ignition Facility uses a massive laser to focus enormous amounts of energy on a tiny target. The primary mission of this facility is to support our nuclear weapons program. It's also advancing fusion research. Last year, this facility took a historic step forward by producing heat from fusion reactions. This is an important step toward demonstrating usable fusion energy. There are 33 private sector companies developing fusion energy systems right now. Backed by over $4.7 billion in private investment, these fusion companies are making progress. They're eager to partner with the Department of Energy to move beyond fundamental scientific research and research. At the same time, they're outpacing the department by developing technologies that are smaller and cheaper. Private sector companies may demonstrate the ability to generate net energy production before the federal government achieves its milestone. Commonwealth Fusion Systems is one such company. To support these private sector efforts, Congress authorized the Department of Energy to establish a milestone-based fusion development program in the Energy Act of 2020. The department has been slow to implement the program, and I understand that Dr. Su was recently brought in to lead this effort. I look forward to hearing how the department is preparing to work with the private sector to transition from fusion science to commercial fusion energy. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Barrasso. I appreciate the opening remarks. And now we're going to introduce the panel, and then we'll start our testimonies. So I want to turn basically and say thank you to all of you. Dr. Scott Shu is DOE Lead Fusion Coordinator in the Office of Undersecretary of Science and Innovation. Thank you for being here. We have Professor Stephen Cowley, Director of Princeton Plasma Physics Laboratory. Thank you. Dr. Tim Luce, the Chief Scientist at the International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor in France. Thank you. And Dr. Robert Mumgard, CEO of Commonwealth Fusion Systems. So we'll start with Dr. Shu to begin with your opening remarks, sir.
Thank you, Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Barrasso, and distinguished members of the committee for your long-standing support of fusion energy research, including the visionary fusion authorizations in the Energy Act of 2020 and the CHIPS and Science Act, as well as your support for fusion in the Inflation Reduction Act. It is an honor to appear before you today as Lead Fusion Coordinator for the Department of Energy to provide testimony regarding federal support for fusion commercialization. Fusion holds the promise of being an on-demand, safe, abundant source of carbon-free primary energy and electricity, with the potential to transform the way humans generate and use energy. However, much work remains to realize this promise. Fusion may also enable new defense and space capabilities, meaning that the race to fusion is a race for future global leadership. Through recent consensus expert reports, the U.S. fusion R&D community declared that they are ready to take on an energy development mission. This will require a fundamental shift in the U.S. fusion energy strategy. Firstly, a greater emphasis on developing the needed enabling materials and technologies for a fusion pilot plant. And secondly, a greater focus on public-private partnerships to ensure commercial relevance and better harness the large amounts of private capital being invested into predominantly U.S.-based fusion companies. In March this year, the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy and DOE co-hosted a White House summit entitled Developing a Bold Decadal Vision for Commercial Fusion Energy, which aims to seize the opportunity enabled by private capital to translate U.S. leadership in fusion science into a U.S.-led commercial fusion industry. This entails building a strong partnership between DOE and the private sector to resolve the remaining scientific and technological challenges this decade, with the goals of a fusion pilot plant and first commercial deployments in the 2030s. In parallel, we must prepare the path broadly for fusion commercialization, as discussed at the White House Summit. Following the summit, DOE hosted a workshop in June entitled Fusion Energy Development via Public-Private Partnerships, where a broad set of fusion stakeholders had inclusive conversations about the bold decadal vision. A key piece of this vision is a milestone-based fusion development program as first authorized in the Energy Act of 2020. This program, expected to be announced imminently, will support for-profit entities to pursue applied R&D in partnership with national laboratories and universities toward one or more viable fusion pilot plant designs. DOE has also formed a fusion crosscut team to coordinate fusion-relevant activities across the Office of Science, ARPA-E, NNSA, nuclear energy, economic impact and diversity, and environmental management. To realize an operating fusion pilot plant on a decadal timescale requires increased funding, as well as attention to investment strategies that can amplify federal funding. For example, ARPA-E's fusion portfolio has to date received follow-on private funding 6 times the original federal funding. Let me turn to the role of ITER in the bold decadal vision. While I defer to Dr. Luce to speak to ITER's mission and updates, I emphasize that there are opportunities to maximize ITER's benefits for the bold decadal vision starting immediately. Examples include placing more Americans on the ground at ITER and enabling streamlined access by U.S. fusion stakeholders to ITER's data and vast experiences with such a large and complex project. A recent DOE-sponsored ITER Research Needs Workshop discussed these opportunities. Regarding international collaborations more generally, governments and private companies from around the world have expressed interest in collaborating with our bold decadal vision. Collaborative opportunities could include securing startup tritium, sharing test facilities, and developing robust supply chains, just to name a few examples. There is an active Fusion Energy Sciences Advisory Committee charge to assess mutually beneficial international collaborations. Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Barrasso, members of the committee, thank you again for the opportunity to testify. As your committee considers further how to support fusion commercialization, DOE continues to be guided by the visionary authorizations you and your House colleagues have already provided, and the incredibly hard work that the fusion R&D community put into the recent consensus reports declaring that the U.S. is ready for a fusion energy development mission. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Hsu. Now we're going to turn to Dr. Cowley for his opening remarks.
Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Barrasso, and committee members, thank you for the invitation to testify today. I'm the director of the Princeton Plasma Physics Lab, as Senator Manchin said, and a professor of astrophysics at Princeton University. Princeton manages PPL for the Department of Energy, and it's the lead lab in fusion, has been since 1951. We're grateful to this committee for its long-standing commitment to the development of fusion energy. It is indeed an honor to be here today. Senator Barrasso gave us a very good explanation of what fusion is. I will back that up a little bit. It is the power source of the sun and all the stars in the universe. It is the process of fusing small atoms to make bigger atoms, small atoms like hydrogen, to make bigger atoms like helium. Indeed, that's what the sun is doing and has been doing for 4.6 billion years. Fusion is, in many ways, the perfect energy source. It is safe and clean. It has no greenhouse gas emissions and no long-term radioactive waste. The fuel we need for fusion is extracted from seawater. It is abundant and sustainable for millions of years. But fusion requires unbelievable conditions, astonishing temperatures of over 100 million degrees. So, is it even possible to do fusion on Earth? The answer is clearly yes. As far back as 1994, we made over 10 million watts of fusion power at PPPL in a device that used powerful magnets to contain and control a 250 million degree fuel. Fusion research took another major leap forward in 2021 with two remarkable results. First, the National Ignition Facility at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory achieved the first self-sustained fusion burn from a pellet ignited by the world's most powerful laser. That same year, the joint European Torus in the UK sustained fusion conditions to release 59 megajoules of fusion energy. The question, therefore, is not whether we can do it, but whether we can make fusion electricity at a cost that the consumer wants to pay. I'm optimistic that we can, clearly, but only if we both harness the private sector to drive down cost and utilize the public sector, the nation's national laboratories and universities, to propel the science and innovation forward. Neither sector is sufficient alone. What should the federal government do now to hasten the arrival of commercial fusion and meet the administration's decadal vision that Dr. Hsu describes? I will highlight some immediate actions. The National Academy of Sciences, Engineering and Medicine last year published a report bringing fusion to the US grid. That report recommends a clear and ambitious goal. The Department of Energy and the private sector should produce net electricity in a fusion plant in the United States in the 2035 to 2040 timeframe. The first step towards this is contained in the report's second recommendation. The Department of Energy should move forward now to foster the creation of national teams, including public-private partnerships, that will develop conceptual pilot plant designs and technology roadmaps that will lead to an engineering design of a pilot plant that will bring fusion to commercial viability. This is essential. We must urgently form those teams and develop these conceptual designs. I'm delighted that the CHIPS and Science Act authorizes the Office of Science to establish not less than 2 national teams that shall develop conceptual pilot plant designs and technology roadmaps. We're ready to go. My optimism about fusion's commercial prospects is not only rooted in last year's impressive results, but also in recent step changes in our scientific understanding. Notably, advances in theory, algorithms, and high-performance computing have finally made it possible to predict the turbulence and instabilities that dominate all fusion experiments and have frustrated progress. These advances have been validated by beautiful experiments on the D3D tokamak at General Atomics and on NSTX at PPPL. Those experiments must continue if we are to improve our predictive capability. The solution to the fiendishly difficult turbulence problem is a triumph of the DOE-funded program. It is not just an intellectual breakthrough. It is now possible to design and optimize fusion systems on the computer. With industry and university partners, PPPL is addressing the need by combining virtual engineering and the latest fusion science to innovate computationally. This plays into the Department of Energy's leadership in computational science that for many years has dominated the world in this area. These powerful new tools and their potential to shorten the time to fusion electricity are also recognized in the CHIPS and Science Act, in which the Secretary is authorized to establish and operate a national high-performance computing for fusion innovation center. This too is essential. Finally, we need to address the crucial fusion technologies that were set aside while we mastered the containment of the hot fuel. Technologies like materials, how to actually convert neutrons into electricity. Fortunately, the national labs and universities have extensive experience and expertise in related technologies. I'm thinking, for example, of the tritium capability at Savannah National Laboratory, and the nuclear technology and design expertise at Idaho National Lab, and the materials expertise at Oak Ridge National Lab. These are exciting times as we progress towards fusion commercialization. The number of applicants for our fusion PhD programs has nearly tripled as students sign up to deliver the perfect energy source. It will take immense private, public, and international efforts, but I am convinced we are in the end game. Thank you again for your support, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Cowley. And now visiting us from France, we have Dr. Luce.
So thank you to the chair, Senator Manchin, ranking member, Senator Barrasso, members of the committee for the opportunity to discuss fusion energy. As introduced, I am Tim Luce. I'm presently the head of science and operations domain, chief scientist for the ITER organization. The ITER organization is responsible for the coordination of the design, assembly, commissioning, and operation of the ITER tokamak with the goal of demonstration of fusion power production at the power plant scale. The world needs reliable energy in sufficient quantity to support the development of society without adverse impact on our environment. And to address this need, multiple solutions both for the near term and in the future should be explored. As has been stated already, fusion energy is not yet at the stage to satisfy the need for abundant clean energy. However, we know that fusion has the potential to supply this energy for millennia. Fusion can be realized around the globe, enabling ready access to energy, which should reduce one source of conflict among nations. But the potential of fusion remains to be demonstrated at the scales required for energy production for the planet. ITER plays an essential role in this demonstration. While proper conditions for fusion power have been demonstrated in laboratories around the world for seconds at a time, the challenge remains to produce megawatts of power with substantially greater output than input. A fundamental element of the ITER mission is to validate our physics understanding that it's possible to produce a burning or self-heated plasma at the power plant scale. Our goal is 500 megawatts output at 10 times the input power. A second key element is to test some of the essential technologies to bring fusion into the energy economy. Now under assembly, ITER is more than 75% complete for the infrastructure and components needed for first plasma operations. As a member of the ITER agreement, the U.S. plays an essential role. About 85% of the capital investment in ITER is supplied by in-kind contributions. For the U.S., this is the responsibility of the ITER Project Office in Oak Ridge under the direction of the Department of Energy, and it continues to deliver a range of systems necessary for ITER mission success. Through the research enabled through the Office of Fusion Energy Sciences, the U.S. fusion program has been a leader in the physics understanding that led to the ITER design and continues this leadership with physics R&D directed toward the optimization of the ITER research plan. And finally, the ITER organization consists of staff from all the members, and the U.S. staff play a vital role in all facets of the work going on at the ITER project. The ITER organization cannot advocate for any specific proposals to member governments, but we wholeheartedly support the development of roadmaps to fusion energy by the members. Preparing to build on the success of ITER will bring the maximum return on the ITER investment. In this light, we note positively the recent National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine report. The title, Bringing Fusion to the U.S. Grid, places the focus on fusion playing a role in the energy supply economy, which is our fervent hope as we work toward accomplishing the ITER mission. And it's appropriate to note here specific places where ITER has contributed or will contribute to a fusion energy roadmap. First, ITER will demonstrate our scientific understanding of fusion plasmas and inform designers of future fusion pilot plants and power plants regarding trade-offs among key design features, such as pulsed versus steady-state operation. Second, ITER is providing us with practical experience in licensing a fusion facility under nuclear safety regulations. Third, the in-kind supply model for ITER components has made and should continue to make a positive impact on industry, resulting in the development of a new global fusion supply chain and workforce. These are essential steps that will support the design and construction of a fusion pilot plant and eventually a fusion economy. ITER is a prudent investment as part of a fusion energy strategy. For a fraction of the total investment, which minimizes the individual risk to the members. Each of the members receives 100% of the ITER science, technology, and associated intellectual property. Continued U.S. support for ITER is essential for the path to fusion energy and provides important experience for a fusion pilot plant. The ITER organization is grateful for the support for fusion by this committee and its counterpart in the House and by individual members of Congress. We acknowledge the support from the Department of Energy through the Office of Science and the engagement of many U.S. companies contributing to ITER. Finally, we're indebted to the individual U.S. researchers, engineers, and those in other disciplines in the national laboratories, universities, and industry who've made fusion their goal and their passion, whether directly toward ITER or in parallel. This passion is necessary to realize our common goal of seeing fusion energy take its place in the energy economy. I thank you for your interest, and I welcome any questions you may have.
Thank you, Dr. Lewis. And finally, we have Dr. Mumgard.
Thank you, Chairman Manchin, Ranking Member Barrasso, and esteemed members of the committee, especially for the long-standing support for fusion. I think that has led us to where we are today. So I'm Bob Mumgard. I'm the CEO, co-founder of Commonwealth Fusion Systems. What is that? That is a fusion company, a company that's 4 years old with 300 people, that's backed by private investment from people like Bill Gates and large energy investors who believe in the potential of fusion. I'm here also representing the Fusion Industry Association, which is over 30 members, and I'm a founding board member there. My role in this committee is a bit different because my esteemed colleagues here have already explained what fusion is, where the science is, and how far we've come, and they're exactly right. And really, I'm here to talk about the next step, where we're investing, and that is, how do we get to fusion commercialization? And this is where fusion makes an impact in the world, because we go from a world about resources, under us or shining on us, to a world about resources that are what we can do, what our people can do, human resources, to take a technology and bring it to scale. And it's widely agreed, I think seen here, that fusion is at an inflection point where we're going from the science to energy, and we're thinking about what that looks like. This has been seen by the private markets, who have put $4.7 billion in, much of that recently. And that's into developing technologies that could scale. And this represents, actually more money invested in fusion than in advanced nuclear reactors, for instance. And of course, other nations also see that inflection point. And they're acting. They're acting fast. They're acting bold. And we at CFS regularly get inquiries from other governments about where to build the first fusion power plant, where to use what test facilities. And the U.S., long a leader in fusion science, risks not leading but buying fusion energy from elsewhere. We're in a race to put that fusion on the grid as soon as possible in the 30s. And the consequences of not winning are substantial. And today, we're not where we want to be in that race. But I think we're seeing a big change. That the key word here is bold. We're seeing a bold decadal vision. And there are some policies that are already underway that I think are really going to be supportive. We already have a lot of the elements that are bold in the fusion industry itself. So you can see pictures of people putting hardware in the ground, building things and trying things. And that's very exciting. The public programs are now also figuring out how to support that. And so where can they help? First, we should note that much of what needs to be done is already authorized. It's already gone through this. We've looked at it. We've looked at the plans. We've passed the things that we need to pass. And I think about it in 4 different buckets. So first, there's an alignment activity that needs to happen, which is aligning the existing strong programs with an energy mission. And as pointed out in the National Academy's report, the DOE should focus on a domestic fusion energy industry and all the technologies that feed that. To do that, we need the DOE national labs, the universities, to focus on their core strengths, which is scientific, computing, innovation at the basic science level, materials, etc. While the private sector focuses on its core strengths, which is deploying technologies, building things, engineering, market assessments, understanding what is attractive. And together, we're going to get there faster than we would individually. Second, we need to build things. We need to build test stands. Those have been identified in the National Academy's report, the FESAC report, And we should start doing those right now, because other nations are doing things in metal that we have only looked at on paper for the last couple of years. Those are authorized. Third, we need to enable pilot plants. Now, these are plants that put power on the grid, and importantly, in a commercially relevant way. That's really important for the companies, because that's part of their business plan, to show they can do that, and then do that repeatedly as an industry. Fortunately, we have examples about how to do that well in other areas of science and technology in the United States. We have, for instance, the NASA COTS program, which worked with SpaceX to be able to go up to the International Space Station and provide a new capability that could then be used commercially and now dominates the launch market. And that was enabled because Congress saw that, stable funding, being bold, they put up $500 million of NASA COTS program in year one to fund for 5 years. Everyone could see where that was going to go and could go there quickly together. That milestone program in fusion is already authorized and waiting to be funded and waiting to be actually put in implementation. Fourth, we need to ensure regulatory clarity. We have a process in place with the NRC right now, and it's actually near its conclusion. So hopefully that goes well, but Congress should continue to monitor that. And I'm pretty confident that a bold decadal plan that hits these 4 things, working together, building the necessary test stands, enabling a milestone program for a pilot plant, and doing regulatory certainty, will be able to put the U.S. into the lead. And it will show that this commercialization activity is indeed now and could result in an industry in not the second half of the century, but hopefully in the 30s. So with that, thank you for the invitation. Look forward to answering questions.
Thank you very much. To all of you, appreciate very much in your opening remarks and your making the effort to be here. I'll start the questions out, if you will. Dr. Luce, first I want to thank you from traveling so far to be with us today. I enjoyed my visit to ITER. My entire staff did. You all were very gracious, and we learned a tremendous amount, and it was very impressionable. It's a remarkable effort to the international collaboration, scientifically ingenuity, and engineering that will demonstrate the commercial viability of fusion energy, and it opened my eyes more than any, I believe, to there's possibilities available to not only the collaboration between nations that are not in the best terms and not getting any better since I was there, of course, the impact of harnessing fusion. So, can you describe how ITER demonstration will assist the effort to commercialize fusion energy technology? And all, like in the United States, I'm sure other countries, they all have variations of what they're trying to achieve and still belonging to that. Are they duplicating what we're doing, spending more money and just taking time to do what's already been done, or more effort into ITER that can give them that technology?
Thank you, Senator. As I pointed out in my opening remarks, the primary mission is to remove uncertainty from the scientific point of view. And as Steve said, we've made great progress in predictive, but in the end, we need to validate that predictive capability with an actual demonstration. And we believe ITER will perform that demonstration in a variety of operating scenarios. So this enables others to take that information and apply it to design of pilot plants or power plants. It can go in parallel or it can go in series. It's a matter of a decision from the individual member governments, how rapidly they want to progress.
Let me ask simply this, in layman's terms. Mm-hmm. What you're doing at ITER at a mammoth scale, and I was just blown away with the scale. But fusion's been around for a while. People have been working for this for some time. All of you all have been involved one way or another. What is ITER doing differently than what has already been done? And is there anyone else that has done something on a smaller scale that gives ITER more of a direction and a pathway?
Yep. So indeed, the JET tokamak, operated by the European Union, has recently operated at tens of megawatts of fusion power, but not yet at gain. So it
takes as much to put it. They're putting as much in, and
correct,
they're taking
slightly
out,
more.
So there's no net. Slightly
Correct.
more. Okay.
Yeah. So we need to go to the frontier where the dominant heating source is from the fusion reactions themselves. That has not been accomplished, and it needs to be accomplished somewhere. It's a vital first step.
And that's what the demonstration that we saw at ITER has that capability of doing.
Correct.
Is there anything else in the world that has that capability?
There are plans, I think Dr. Mumgard will tell you about their plan to demonstrate that type of capability. I'll let him talk about
Let me
what
just
they
say this, why would we be investing in ITER or investing in that if we already invested in ITER and you're doing something on a much larger scale?
I think we're doing things that are complementary. And so it's a way of advancing the program, minimizing the risk, and focusing on things that ITER cannot do. What Dr. Mumgard mentioned is absolutely true. The technologies you need for a fusion economy are not going to be demonstrated properly in ITER. And so facilities that can come along in parallel of that, both in special laboratories or in unit demonstrations, are essential.
Let me do this, go to Dr. Shoup. Dr. Shoup, basically the Energy Act of 2020, the CHIPS and Science Act of 2022 provided the Department of Energy with direction to aggressively pursue the development of fusion research and technology development. Calls for DOE to provide a 10-year strategic plan, on and on and on. In April, the White House held a summit on developing a bold decadal vision for commercial fusion energy, which resulted in 3 new initiatives. The first was the announcement of the Department of Energy agency-wide fusion initiative to accelerate the viability of commercial fusion. The second was naming you, Dr. Shoup, as the lead fusion coordinator, and the last was making available $50 million for advancing a fusion pilot plant. So first of all, I would ask, can you provide the committee with an update on what's going on and where the bold decadal vision of commercial fusion lies? And how are you spending the $50 million?
Absolutely. Thank you, Senator Manchin. So the DOE right now is, formulating and developing its plans for the bold decadal vision, as I outlined in my opening remarks. Central to that is, as Dr. Mumgard said, aligning the efforts between the public and private sector activities. And really, we're focused on resolving the remaining scientific and technological challenges in order to enable that vision of operating a pilot plant.
If I may ask, is it redundant to what's being done at ITER? Are you duplicating what ITER has already done? Are you trying to do something differently that ITER needs you to do so it helps them?
It's both. ITER is going to be a scientific tool going forward where we can do research that can't be done on any single private sector facility. But on the other hand, ITER is not going to do everything that will bring us to commercial viability either. For example, we need to really accelerate efforts in, say, the fuel cycle as an example, right? Tritium breeding. These are areas that the bold decadal vision really needs to focus on to accelerate in order to meet the timescales.
Gotcha. Now we'll turn to Senator Barrasso for his questions.
Well, thanks so much, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Luce, the chairman testified that in the last month he went to France and it changed his life.
Wine.
Last month, my staff went to Massachusetts and they brought me some pictures. And Dr. Mumgard, they went to your facility and were very impressed. Private fusion companies have now raised $4.7 billion. You mentioned Bill Gates and some others. Can you just talk about why are they so confident about the prospects of commercial fusion energy? And then specifically, what types of metrics have these investors established to assess a company's performance?
Right. So first, when you think about what the private investors are looking at, they're looking at this type of a panel, what the science has done so far. The statement of conviction of something like ITER that fusion's worth doing and can be done is a huge factor for then putting in private capital to do the next step. That foundation cannot be underestimated. They're also looking at the quality of the science and the predictive capabilities, that we can actually do experiments faster and cheaper, that we don't need to guess and check. That's key for developing a technology. They're also looking at the market pull. You can't underestimate how big of a problem energy security, abundance, and sustainability is. That's a trilemma that needs to be solved. And when we solve that, they'll build a massive industry. Whether that industry is in some other energy source or fusion, it is up and open for the grabs right now. And so they're looking across those, and they're saying fusion is serious. and they're serious people taking fusion seriously with serious dollars.
So what?
They're then looking at the different companies, and they see a variety of approaches, which means that more than one might work. And so a portfolio approach can work. And so now they're asking the question, what can we do together to make the likelihood of one of those working soon and scalable higher?
So what metrics are they using specifically? Do they have, we want this by this, because you had talked about plan to demonstrate net energy production by 2025, and that's earlier than the Department, a decade earlier than the Department of Energy's International Fusion Demonstration Project. So, I'm wondering, should we be reprioritizing our investments in fusion research?
So the two big headline metrics are, can you push a button and make more power out from the plasma than what went in? Break even energy. Above that, there's burning plasma, which burning plasma is also very important scientifically, maybe not big headline. The next big headline is electricity on the grid. And the decadal plan actually breaks that out and says that that's on the goal, electricity on the grid. And the national academies also say those are the two big phases of a pilot plant, net energy, power on the grid. And so they're looking to see that. But of course, they need to see intermediate milestones before then to know that we are on track. And so they're tracking not just what the private companies are doing, but what the labs at JET and others are doing as well to indicate, are we on track? Key thing is time. If we wait, we lose. And that's because the market window is really, really sensitive on time.
Thank you. Dr. Su, in your testimony, I was struck by the fact that when you talked about fusion research has profound impacts for national security. How's the department protecting fusion research from Russia and from China? I saw yesterday that Putin and Xi were going to meet together.
Thank you, Senator. It's a very important question. Our cross-cut team, in fact, has members on it from NNSA especially, and we want to tackle this question more seriously. Furthermore, we're also working with the White House. They are looking into offering cybersecurity training and resources for our private fusion industry. Those are starts, but we know we have to pay careful attention.
So Dr. Luce, as I see Russia and China being bad actors along the way, should they be allowed to continue participating in international fusion projects?
So historically, fusion has been a bridge to have conversations with various political entities with which we don't necessarily share the same worldview. This goes back to Khrushchev visiting the UK in 1957. There is no weaponization potential for magnetic confinement fusion, and for the ITER agreement itself, it is a treaty-level agreement. We've chosen to work together, and I think it's a realization both of the good investment, they get everything from a small amount, but also from a common need. If we can reduce one source of friction among us, this is a plus.
Dr. Cowley, if I could ask you, last week Newsweek published an article highlighting how South Korea researchers sustained a stable fusion reaction for 30 seconds. Who are America's main competitors right now in fusion research?
Well, the biggest investment's clearly coming from China. And China has a plan to get a pilot plant together on a slightly accelerated timescale, even compared to ours. And interestingly, they just announced a second machine to try and rival what the Commonwealth Fusion are doing and go that route, which is the more compact route. They're pouring in dollars. And you know, if you ask what a global competitor is, certainly China. The other one is obviously Europe and the UK. I should not talk too much about the UK, but but there is a plan in the UK to push forward the spherical tokamak concept, which is what the machine at Princeton is innovating on towards a reactor on a similar timescale to the end of the 2030s that we're talking about. I think, you know, China is looking at us and trying to copy the different steps that we're taking, and it's very interesting that they have made a step to copy what Commonwealth Fusion systems are doing. Whether they'll move as fast as the private sector in the US, I have my doubts, but.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For Dr. Shu, as you may know, Hawaii's state constitution requires two-thirds vote of the legislature in order to cite a nuclear fission plant in the state. And this provision was added in 1978, reflecting public concern about the safety of nuclear-powered and the radioactive waste it generates. Today, we are talking about fusion, not fission. So can you describe some of the safety issues we need to take into consideration with fusion and compare them to the safety concerns associated with the fission reactors used in the nuclear plants today? In plain English.
Thank you, Senator. This is indeed a very, very important question you ask. So let me start by saying that the safety profile of fusion is one of its potential benefits. That's why people are excited about it, especially this panel. For example, there is no inherent risk for runaway or meltdown, as you hear about nuclear energy. And fusion does not need any special nuclear materials. For example, plutonium or enriched uranium, and it doesn't produce high-level radioactive waste. So these are great advantages of fusion, both for safety and for licensing. But we must seriously take into consideration the potential safety issues that are specific to fusion. You know, these include kilogram or more quantities of radioactive tritium, which is one of the fuels for fusion, and that must be securely contained. And then the safe handling and disposition of potentially large volumes of low-level waste. And fusion, of course, will also have hazards associated with any large industrial facility.
So since fusion does create some waste, so how do you, what concerns should we have regarding the containment and disposal of the waste produced under the fusion process?
We have to take this seriously and treat it carefully. We think we can do it. And in fact, our Crosscut team in DOE has environmental management as a team member. We will leverage our knowledge and capabilities across the agency to come up with the right solutions. And I think Dr. Cali seems like he wants to jump in here.
The total level of radioactive waste from a typical fusion power station will be about 1,000 times lower than from a fission station. And the half-life of that radioactivity, most of it is less than 10 years. And so by 200 years after the end of the reactor's lifetime, all of that waste can be remanufactured into new fusion plants.
So would you say that the Hawaii Constitution's reference to a fission, that would not prohibit the development of a fusion plant in Hawaii?
We believe so.
Okay.
I'm not a lawyer.
Yes. Dr. Shu, you noted that the pathway to fusion energy goes well beyond technological challenges, and including, among other priorities, quote, public engagement and energy justice. I very much appreciate your reference to energy justice. Can you explain a little bit by what you mean by energy justice, and how does DOE plan to engage the public on fusion energy and energy justice and other challenges you described?
Yeah, thank you again for a wonderful question. So these are indeed a high priority of the Bold Decadal Vision. We humbly seek to learn from the deployment experiences of other technologies, energy and otherwise, in engaging with the public and energy justice communities. You know, not only are these the right action to take, but working toward these goals will actually help accelerate fusion deployment when the technology is ready.
What do you mean by energy justice?
We want to address how energy technologies have harmed particular communities in the past, and make sure not only do we restore those harms, but make sure that we don't perpetuate those harms.
Thank you. I was particularly taken by that concern that you raised, and I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Luce, now, if y'all have covered this, I apologize. But it seems to be a little bit of a tension. As my staff whispered into my ear, Democrats are going to want to support the public and Republicans are going to want to support the private initiatives. And you'll diplomatically say that, you know, they are going to work together. But I want to explore that a little bit. And so, Dr. Luce, we've heard today that the private sector has been making great progress in conjunction with the public sector, writ large. But that ITER is progressing slowly and increasing in cost. So if I had to defend continued investment in ITER in 30 seconds, what would be the elevator speech that would allow me to defend the continued investment when it seems as if the private is racing ahead?
So 2 key points. For an investment of around 10%, you get 100%. So your risk exposure is less in terms of cost. So even if it...
You lost me there. I'm going to give you another 10 seconds if you don't mind, so go ahead.
So the model for the ITER cost is that, for example, the U.S. pays 9% of the construction, 13% of operations. They get 100% of the outcome.
Got it. Okay.
So if they were to do that themselves, they would have to pay 100%. So it's a prudent investment. The second thing is it is already in progress. So you have learned already lessons that need to be integrated into things going in parallel. As we said before, that it's largely a scientific removal of doubt and beginning the technology journey. Other places, like Dr. Munkmeyer said, are focusing on the technology journey. This is where industry does it the best. In terms of public-private, I would have an observation. The one place where the U.S. government has worked on technology development is national security. To me, it's clear that energy security is national security.
I accept that. Now, but going back to, you know, establishing certainty, it seems like there's $4.7 billion in private investment, which seems to be pretty assured. So I'm just making that observation. Dr. Mumgaard, you point out kind of how NASA used to be the one that sent all the, I think it was your testimony, all the rockets into space, and now we rely upon privates to do it. They do it faster and cheaper. And it was clear in context, you were kind of drawing an analogy here. Knowing that you have to probably be a little diplomatic, but frankly, I hope you're not. How would you give a 30-second speech in response to the question which I ask?
Yeah. Just because we have Boeing doesn't mean we stop building wind tunnels in the public program. That you have to keep innovating on the science. You have to keep pushing that forward. And if we're right and we build a giant fusion industry, something like ITER makes a whole lot of sense, right? Because it's going to continue to be a center of excellence to try new things that are too risky for the private programs to try. And if we're right and we have a commercial fusion industry, that allows the public program to focus on the next step. And so when NASA, you know, no longer goes to low Earth orbit, instead has commercial entities do that, that frees NASA to go and do the really cool stuff, like go to Europa, because they don't have the baggage of running a technology and industry. And so this is analogous here, where we're trying to build on the science.
I get your point. Dr. Hsu and Dr. Calley, y'all are kind of disinterested, in my mind at least. I'm going to let y'all arbitrate. Okay, now, I don't know the capabilities of what ITER has, because I have a sense that it's trying to prove in concept the process by which you would do this. It's going to show that you can have sustained increase of temperature to a sufficient degree that this reaction can occur. But when you're putting that much investment into hard structures, you can't really say, well, now we want to do this. You know, way back when I was taking biochemistry and chemistry, we would say, oh, now we want to make this reaction, not that. And we would rearrange a few things, and boom, we were blowing up the lab with another way. This is going to be billions sunk into capital projects. And it's hard for me to think that you're going to be able to, let's kind of rearrange everything and see how it works differently. So if Dr. Mumgaard is suggesting that there's going to be a basic level of pushing the ball forward on science, how much flexibility will this built infrastructure give to try different things? Dr. Calley, you're outside the government, so I'm going to ask you first, okay? So.
I think there's a key thing that ITER's going to do, which is it's an experiment. So they're going to study what's going on inside the reaction. when Commonwealth Fusion or one of the other private companies actually demonstrates fusion, they're going to move forward and try and make electricity. But one of the things that has got us to where we are is by understanding the science of containment of the 100 million degree plasmas.
Isn't that the baseline of what they're attempting to do? And once that's established, you've established.
No, because in fact, we contain it with magnetic fields that push it in and take it off the walls. And there's turbulence that brings the heat from the middle to the outside. And if we can reduce that turbulence, we can make the whole system smaller. And in fact, the pound for pound, the highest performing experiment in the world is really General Atomics D3D in San Diego. They have managed to reduce the turbulence to much smaller levels than any of the other machines in the world. And that's by understanding what's going on. And therefore, they get higher performance. And in the end, it's going to be a question of, is the performance good enough to make the electricity cheap enough? And we don't know the answer to that yet.
And Mr. Chairman, could I ask Dr. Hsu just to weigh in if he has anything to add?
Absolutely.
Dr. Hsu?
Thank you, Senator. Well, I won't repeat what's been said, but I'll add a few points. I think the international engagements aspect of ITER have a lot of spillover of benefits, and we'd be happy to go into those a bit more, maybe in written responses in the interest of time. Maybe I'll just mention one, international coordination on things like regulatory is very important. If the U.S. wants to export fusion as a global product, for example. I also want to point to Office of Nuclear Energy example. We've deployed nuclear energy for decades and decades, but we still have need for test reactors and other facilities to continue optimizing the industry. So that's one example where ITER could continue to help, regardless of the private sector timescale. And finally, at this very moment, I sincerely hope Dr. Mumgard proves us wrong, but ITER is the surest path to a burning plasma at this point in time. And of course, we all should continue to reassess based on global developments in fusion development.
Okay, thank you all.
Thank you very much. Now we have Senator Hickenlooper.
Great, thank you very much, and thank you all for your time, your commitment, and all the work you're doing. It is, and the chair has said this before. What you're doing has the direct potential to change life on Earth as we know it, and so many of the challenges we face. I want to start with Dr. Mumgard. Leading fusion companies and efforts, the pathways of progress are getting millions of dollars in investment. Very exciting for the industry. However, there are many smaller companies just starting up, like you were a few years ago. We have several of them in Colorado, of course. The newer companies are smaller, don't have the track record, attract less funding and attention. They struggle to get any federal dollars because of the hurdles like high cost, share requirements, and milestone-based funding. What should we be thinking about to try and lower barriers and direct capital towards the innovative, the nascent fusion companies?
Yeah, great question. We think of it as a ladder. So you have at one level grants like ARPA-E, which are how most of these companies get started. That's a grant. But then you also have things like, well, if you had access so that the science that running supercomputer time that you couldn't afford to do as a small company, you get access not just to stuff, but to people's minds. So lowering the barrier to collaboration between the labs and the companies. And then that means you get results, and those results mean that maybe you're in an innovation program by Tech to Market from DOE to help find connections to people that might invest. And so you get up and up in the ladder, and the big scale, maybe it's a milestone program, but after that, maybe it's the tax incentives and subsidies that we do for any energy system. So it's important that we have a ladder that doesn't have gaps. And that means it has to be a holistic look at it.
Great, and I could not agree more, and that's part of our job, but we need your input to make sure we do that properly, that they're not missing rungs, gaps that get in the way. Dr. Luce, let me turn to you. It is always great to see a lasting international collaborative effort. It's so important for so many reasons, but especially for such an important energy innovation. At the same time, it is a global race, which obviously will at some point hopefully have important energy security consequences. Some of the major players in the fusion space, like the United Kingdom and Canada, do not participate in ITER. And again, as we've seen with Dr. Cawley, that British accent does create a sense of real knowing. All the movies we've seen about these frontiers, they have an advantage that we should recognize. How do we balance the collaboration and competition to ensure that the U.S. stays ahead of the curve, but also works together with our allies to make progress on fusion?
Well, I think you've almost answered your own question, that engagement is essential. If you're engaged with what the world is doing, then your investments will return more because you participate and then you choose what you can do best or what you want to focus on, and that enhances the investment, basically.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And just as a follow-up, any of you can answer, what are some of the things we should be learning from other countries? Not necessarily about a specific scientific innovation, but process or approach. If there's something that you should be sharing with the Senate. But you look at it like Jeopardy, you just push the button and say, me.
Well, one of the reasons why ITER is in France is because it has a unique nuclear regulatory regime that's demonstration-based. So this has challenges in terms of certainty for industry if they're using a proven technology, but it allows for innovation. So there's room for consideration of how to do regulation that enables innovation.
Got it. I like that. Yeah. Dr. Mumford.
The UK, so the UK is in the middle of executing a very good transition from focusing on plasma science to enabling technology development at the UK AEA and building test stands that other people are going to come use. And they've grown an entire technology cohort of people in doing so. So in terms of the pivot, the UK has done a very good job.
Interesting. Really good. Anything else? Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to make that point, actually, but but again, so is China, and China is putting a lot of money into the technology aspects, the materials, how to handle the fuel cycle. That's processing the fuels and bringing them in, the turning neutrons into electricity. This is something the U.S. program has put aside for a period of time and needs to really focus back on. And the decadal plan and the national academies have all focused on saying, if we're serious about electricity, that's what we've got to do. And the Europeans are doing it, the British are doing it very well, and the Chinese are doing it.
Great. Perfect. Thank you very much. Dr. Su, anything?
Just to hammer that point, what I said in my opening remarks is that we are ready for an energy development mission for fusion, and that requires a fundamentally different strategy.
Right. No, point well taken. Thank you all. I yield back to the chair.
Thanks, Senator. Thank you. Senator Hoeven.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to all of you for being here today. So, in a nutshell for each of you, why fusion? I mean, we went the nuclear fission route, obviously not only in weapons, but then utilizing it for energy. That seemed to have fallen into disfavor for a variety of reasons. Now, there's some effort, I think, to return to it. And then I also remember the Super Collider days back in Texas, and I mean, we were putting billions into that back when billions was a lot of money, right? And that didn't seem to actually happen. So is this really going to happen? And why do you think so, and why should it, in layman's terms now? So that the public actually goes, gosh, we want that, right? Because that's a big part of any of this, particularly with the massive investment that's required. So I don't know, Dr. Su, if you want to start.
Sure, thank you. It's always good to ask the questions right from the basics, so I appreciate that. I think a couple of things. One is fusion has a lot of implications for not only energy security, but national security and global leadership. So it is a race for future global leadership. That's one point. Second point is energy abundance. We will need a lot of carbon-free primary energy going forward for multiple reasons. And we hope we can get there. And fusion is kind of the ideal way to do it. It is energy, it's dense in energy, the fuel is theoretically limitless, and it can be deployed anywhere. You know, you don't rely on weather or climate, et cetera. And so there are many reasons why it would be good to have in our back pocket as something for civilization. I'll turn it over to my colleagues.
At a PCAST hearing around December, Jesse Jenkins, my colleague from Princeton, talked about what was missing in the suite of technologies in order to decarbonize America's supply. This is Net Zero America project that he leads from Princeton. And the key thing that's missing is what is now termed the firm energy sources. These are ones you can turn on when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, and you can supply energy in all kinds of places. And his point was that we don't have enough options in that space. At this point, they're basing it on doing extension of nuclear and using carbon capture and storage. And both of those have, at this point, unless we develop advanced nuclear, they have finite lifetimes. You know, decades, possibly, they can be used for, and then we'll have used up their potential. And therefore, we have to have a firm energy source that goes into that space, and that's fusion.
This contains fusion fuel. This makes it easy. If we use deuterium tritium, everybody has this. It's safe. Our byproduct is helium. It's an inert gas. The reactor has in it 1 gram of fuel at any time. It can't run away. We've demonstrated scientific understanding to manipulate, as Steve has said, to optimize. Where we need the next frontier is technology. And that's where the mystery is, and that's where the investment needs to be. We don't have the same predictive capability for metals, for other things that we have for the plasma physics, which is tremendously hard science, but we've really attacked it, and we've largely solved that problem. We have to show that, but it's solved. Now we need to address the technology.
In terms of layman, I go to like the most layman thing I can think of. Fusion is the energy source. It's in all the science fiction. It's in all the comic books. Why? And it's because it's a fundamentally different relationship between humanity and energy, because it's energy without fuel, without consumption. It is if you have a machine, you have energy. Full stop. Forever. No one can take it away from you. No one can stop you from doing it. You have energy. Not only do you have energy that is 99.999999 the energy of the universe. We just saw James Webb. That was a very fancy camera in space to take picture of fusion power plants, ancient ones. It is the thing of the stars. So it's like a very fundamental difference. And it manifests itself in all these different practical ways we talk about of energy security, but it is like very different.
Are we really going to get there? Is this, you know, the fuel of the future and always will be? You mentioned General Atomics. I do a lot of work with General Atomics. I was intrigued when you said they have been doing some really good work. I think they're really, you know, good about actually getting a result. I mean, they have to be. They're private sector and so forth. So they don't have limitless funding, even on the scale of some of the really big companies. So if you'll indulge me for just a minute, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
And maybe I'll come back to you, Professor Cowley. Why is it not always going to be the future of the fuel of the future? Why are we actually going to get there, and when? And if you want to work in a little bit on GA, that would be good. What they're doing, because it sounded like you thought they were actually getting to something.
Yeah, they've done some beautiful experiments at GA that have reduced the loss of heat from the experiment so that you can therefore make the experiment smaller and in the future make fusion reactors smaller. But the reason I'm actually optimistic about fusion is we've actually done some. All right, we've actually made the fusion reaction happen, and last year was a record-breaking year. The experiment at Lawrence Livermore Lab actually got a fusion burn. Right? So we know that fusion is possible. We now have to apply all the power of the private sector in order to drive down the costs so that it's then at a cost that the consumer wants to pay.
So it is technologically possible, maybe not yet commercially viable? I mean, you actually can do it?
That's a good way to say it. I'm sorry. Yeah.
That's very interesting. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And now, by the graciousness of Senator Cortez Masto, Senator Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senator Cortez Masto. Dr. Luce, I want to just follow up a little bit on, you said for ITER, 9% of the investment, 100% of the outcome. Do you mean we just get 100% of the results and the technology and the intellectual property? Is that what the 100% is?
Indeed, but also, as has been pointed out, I think, by Scott before, if we're engaged, you get the know-how. And know-how is a critical intellectual property that's very challenging to capture. You don't get it. You don't want a chef that's read a cookbook. You want a chef that's actually been in a kitchen.
Yeah, it's the reason why other countries have a hard time manufacturing jet engines, even though they can get a jet engine and look at it, but they might not be able to make it. So yeah, I understand that. And Dr. Luce, I also want to follow up on the fuel issue. Mentioning that we have, holding up the water, and tritium or helium-3 being our fuel that would go into a fusion reaction. What's the processing to turn this into tritium?
Well, not into tritium. There's deuterium here directly, so it's a distillation process, a mass separation. The important thing that needs to be done for fusion is to closing the fuel cycle. Tritium has a decay lifetime of only about 12 and a half years, so it doesn't exist naturally. We need a startup.
Well, it doesn't exist naturally on Earth.
Correct, but we need to make it within the fusion power plant. So we need the blanket technology to make the tritium fuel and return it not just to that plant, but to the next plants also.
We often hear these, I spent 15 years at NASA, and as we talk about going back to the moon, often the whole thing comes up about, well, there's tritium on the moon. We could bring that back and use it in fusion power plants. Is that a realistic source of tritium?
So I think you're thinking of helium-3. So there is a reaction between deuterium and helium-3, but it's more difficult to get to go than it is the deuterium-tritium. So in terms of optimization and advance, I would see that as similar, as you mentioned, jet engines. It's like the jet engine to the Wright Flyer, and there's a progression you might go through in a fusion economy. And so yes, that might be a future fuel, but it's not the optimum way to start.
Okay, so you don't feel like fuel is going to be an issue once we have the technology developed?
We have to do it, but yes, there is a known way to do this, known processes, and we just have to demonstrate the industrialization of them.
Dr. Hsu, when I think about this, and I can't remember who mentioned this, but we were, talking about, when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining, you have a ready source of power. Is it true that if batteries became more dense and more efficient, that at some point this becomes a race between fusion technology and battery technology?
Yeah, I'll take that. Thank you very much, Senator. If I may, I want to just go back to the fuel question 1 second. I think as part of our bold decadal vision, we want to be very, very transparent about fusion with the public. It's important to mention that in order to breed tritium, we need lithium. So lithium and deuterium actually are the input fuels for a DT fusion system. Fortunately, we don't need huge amounts of lithium because of how energy dense fusion is, but that's very important, and it's something that we have to tackle. Mm-hmm. But we think we know how to do it, as Dr. Luce says. In terms of a race, so I don't like to look at it as a race. I think right now we need as many energy technologies and to deploy them and to develop new ones so that we have the best chance of meeting our decarbonization goals and finding a way forward sustainably. Fusion, though, however, as Dr. Kelly said, does have because it's an on-demand source, it will help the overall energy system be lower cost and more reliable.
So you're not concerned, let's say we're able to get, battery efficiency up by another, 20% and more dense, that at some point, when you look at the cost to generate power, that the solar modules have become so cheap that you deploy more solar, you store the energy in a battery, and then you solve the problem for when the sun isn't shining or the wind isn't blowing.
So I come from ARPA-E before this, where we looked at every energy technology in existence, and what I keep coming back to is we need more than 600 exajoules of carbon-free energy per year by mid-century.
Okay.
Frankly, I don't know how we're going to supply that without multiple
what we have.
sources.
Yeah. And I agree, and I am supportive of funding, this technology. I think it would be a, incredible, breakthrough for our country. We want to lead on this technology because if we don't, somebody else is going to. And it does go a long way to solving a lot of issues, what you just mentioned, but also, issues surrounding climate. And in Arizona, we've got, we've got hotter, days every year. We're looking at the potential of, if we continue on the business as usual plan at the end of the century, there are going to be a lot more days over 100 degrees. That means more wildfires, more drought. So I want to, see this move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Cortez Masto.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm always so impressed with the diverse perspectives on this panel. Here I am going to be talking about critical minerals and how we mine those here in the state. We've got an astronaut talking about bringing them from the moon. I think it's just so impressive. So I'm always pleased to listen to my colleague from Arizona and his perspectives that he brings. So that is my next question. So for just to open it up to the panel, nearly everyone on today's panel has discussed the need to develop a domestic supply chain in order for fusion energy deployment to be successful. What is the potential for domestic productions of the minerals that are necessary for the deployment of fusion energy projects? And how does that fit into this panel or this committee's discussion on identifying our current critical mineral domestic manufacturing needs and capabilities? I'm going to open it up to the panel if anybody would like to start, and maybe, yeah, Dr. Mum.
Yeah, so we look at this from a commercialization standpoint. We try to get ahead of the supply chain. One thing to remember is that because there's not a fuel, the fuel is deuterium and some lithium, that's not really what we're talking about. We're talking about like what it takes to build the machine, right? And that machine is made out of a lot of steel, so like high quality steel. So you have to have that supply chain in place, including all the manufacturing and forging. There are some unique materials that go into it, like lithium. You need lithium. You don't need a lot of lithium, but you need lithium, at a scale that's a fraction of like the EV market. So domestic lithium is important. There's some rare earths that are not a lot, like much less than say a full built-out wind market, but you still need those as well. Things like yttrium. There's some niobium sometimes that you need to have. But they're in amounts that are build a machine and then have it for many, many years, not a continual consumption. There is a manufacturing problem as well. So like you need people that can machine things, people that can put complicated machines together, things that kind of look like aerospace, people that can construct plants, iron workers, et cetera, because you are building an industrial plant.
Okay, anyone else? So let me jump then to the discussion of fiscal resources. I was here earlier and I had to run to the banking committee, but as you were talking with Senator Barrasso, you were talking about the need for public-private really partnerships to validate the demonstration project to move us forward. But what's the fiscal funding that's necessary? There's a lot of private funding that we are seeing coming in, and we want to continue that. But is there a role for us at the federal level? Should we be looking at more of a fiscal investment here? And I'm just curious your thoughts on that, maybe Professor Cowley.
I think what's been authorized in various places is
enough? What we've already authorized through the current appropriations
what's
and
been
legislation?
authorized is not what's been appropriated.
Okay.
Right? What's been authorized is over $1 billion for the federally funded part of the program a year, and we're at about $730 million at this point.
Okay.
I think what's authorized actually is quite good in outlining what should be done by the public sector in order to support the private sector. We need the private sector to drive down costs.
Right.
That's not what we're good at, right? But we do need, we need the public sector to, for instance, help develop the new materials. We need the public sector to continue to innovate the containment so that we can make these things smaller and more efficient, and we can get to market with something that really is cost effective. And so I think what was authorized is actually pretty perceptive about what we need right now.
You're saying that Congress was perceptive? Is that's on the record? That's what you just said?
Yeah.
All right, just checking. Thank you. I appreciate it. Anybody else? I appreciate this conversation today. Thank you very much.
Senator King.
Dr. Kelly, we particularly appreciate your comment because, like most Americans, I attribute about 20 points of IQ to the British accent. Additional IQ, that is, incremental IQ. My father, who grew up in Alexandria, used to say that the Pentagon was the only building in the world where you drive straight at it and it keeps getting further and further away. I feel like that's where fusion is. I've been hearing about fusion for 25 years. It keeps getting further and further away. A variation of Senator Hovind's question, Dr. Hsu, will it ever work? Is it real, or is this a WPA project for scientists?
Thank you, Senator. This is the question that is always on the mind for fusion. But yes, I think the answer is yes. Dr. Cowley earlier explained why we think fusion will work. In fact, fusion does work. It's about getting it to a point where it can be economically attractive and competitive. I also want to say there was a quote to a Russian scientist that said, when will fusion be ready? And he said, when society needs it. And I think we may be at a point where society needs fusion.
Dr. Mumgard, talk to me about when.
Yeah, it's always very hard to predict when technologies will happen. I think if you look at the history of technology development, the argument that, well, we've always talked about it and it's not here yet. We had that argument days before the Wright brothers flew. We had that argument about AI, and look what AI has done. So it's very difficult to predict, but you can look at some indicators, right? The diversity...
The indicator is that the private sector is putting money into it.
Right. You have like the diversity of approaches. You have the diversity of stakeholders who are getting involved in it, from investors, from other corporations that are starting fusion divisions in oil and gas companies. And so there's a lot of indicators that say that we're close. We haven't yet seen the flight, but we've seen like people gliding. We've seen people doing wind tunnel experiments, and it does feel like we're on the precipice of something. And we know that it can be made to work. We have experiments like JET and others, and also, of course, we look at the night.
It's theoretically feasible.
Theoretically feasible, done on Earth in specialized machines, not quite at the right performance, but getting close and improving historically faster than Moore's Law and within a factor of a few away.
Well,
and so it feels good.
Let me go on the assumption that it is possible, and then the question is, how do we get there, and how do we get there as soon as possible? Dr. Luce, this strikes me as a world-saving technology. This isn't just a U.S. technology, and we're used to thinking, in fact, in this hearing, people have talked about a race. We're in a race, with other countries. Shouldn't this be a straight-up international effort? I mean, I don't. If we have adequate non-fossil fuel energy in China, that's a good thing. They haven't won a race. They're helping the environment. So I see this as an opportunity for a worldwide, unprecedented worldwide collaboration on a technology that could literally save the planet.
So we are proving that that's beneficial through the ITER project, and it has as I said before, it's a common need. Everyone will need energy for their civilization to develop, no matter what choices they make. However, I think there has to be national investment too, to have energy security.
I agree with that. I'm talking about the mechanics of carrying it out. I think everybody's got to be invested. But should it, can it be a international collaboration as we work through this?
I believe that's effective, but it is not, it's not complete. So yes, I've spent I spent a lot of my career working internationally. I worked on 11 different fusion facilities, 9 of which were not in the U.S. So I've seen the benefits from this, and those benefits were brought back into the U.S. program, and now I'm with the ITER program, again, working internationally. We get the best of the best by collaborating. But then you have to take advantage of it. We've known for a long time the potential of fusion. I think, as Dr. Mumgaard said in his initial comments, the investment of the public sector enables people to take a little bit more risk with private money and move forward.
That gets into my final question. If it'll work, if it has the enormous potential that you all have testified to, are we doing enough? Shouldn't this be an international Manhattan project rather than, you mentioned $1 billion has been authorized. If this has the promise that we all think it does, then it seems to me this ought to be an even larger investment, both by this country and other countries. And maybe it could be a matching proposition. We'll put up this much money if Germany, Great Britain, China, and Japan put up an equivalent amount or some portion of that. But if it's that good, this ought to be urgent instead of a moving along science project. You're nodding. Nodding doesn't go into the record.
We would love to see something like that. But I have to say, I'm impressed with how the private companies, driven by the competitive spirit, are moving very, very quickly in this space. Energy industry is $8 trillion a year. You get a small percentage of $8 trillion a year, it's a pretty good business. And so, when investors look at this and say, if this is what it's promised to be, the payoff is just so enormous that we're going to see people come in and compete on it. So I like this sort of dual program where we have a very cooperative program on ITER, but then we have a very competitive set of startups that are trying to innovate in it. I think actually, that might be an ideal way to go forward.
Other thoughts, Dr. Mumgaard?
Yeah, I'd echo that, competition is good for some things, but not usually for understanding science, right?
Yeah,
basic
science.
Right. Competition is great for demonstration, for developing supply chains, for doing the technology commercialization activities, for a variety of solving the customer's needs, right? We're not going to invent the right fusion power plant without talking to the people that use it. But if we have lots of companies that talk to lots of people, that's going to be an ecosystem that's going to sort it out as it goes. But I agree with the idea that you can have competitive companies and cooperative international science. And we do that all the time in the human health, where we build pharmaceutical companies that deliver drugs to patients. But we also do research, and we share that research widely, internationally and public and private. And so I see that ecosystem being where this is headed.
Final point, I just hope that if you all have further thoughts about what our response should be, what we could do to further this research, and whether it should be more money or directed in a different way, please let the committee know. We'd be very anxious to work with you on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate it. It's quite interesting, all this discussion. I want to thank you all again. We're going to finish up real quick here. I just have one thing. We all know that fusion reactors require strong magnets, very cold temperatures, achieved with liquid helium, and vast computational power. Many of the technologies that we have developed have required entirely new fields of materials, science processes to achieve and design specification needed for reactions. So we'll start, Dr. Mumgaard, with you, and I'm going to go right down the line here. Do you all have examples, or do you know of any examples of the major advances that fusion research has brought in related materials and supply chains in the market today?
Yeah, your observation that fusion's sort of like at the top of the technology chain, it uses lots of things, is spot on. And so when you think about the superconducting magnets, fusion's always the first to use big magnets. And those have ended up in MRI. And this next generation of magnets is likely to impact that as well, wind turbines, MRI, other things.
Supercomputers. Energy research, and specifically fusion energy research in the U.S., was one of the drivers for the development of supercomputers for non-defense uses.
Great.
I hope I can get two in quickly. The first, the first one is 46% of the steps in making a computer chip are made in plasma reactors that bombard the surface and cut the circuits into the chip and lay down the whole thing. The whole microchip industry is based on plasma processing. That came as a spin-out, partly from the fusion program and partly from, other Bell Labs in the 1990s. Yeah. And it's what drives forward innovation in microelectronics. And we're hoping, again, with the Micro Act, that there'll be support for this kind of research for the next generation of microelectronics.
Great.
One more thing, very briefly. When two black holes collide, as we've seen with the LIGO gravitational wave detector, around them is a plasma, and it's emitting all kinds of gamma rays and X-rays, etc. The codes that solve what happens inside a fusion reactor are now being applied to what happens when two black holes collide.
Wonderful. Dr. Hsu?
I'll add one more related to microelectronics processing, but something that came out of the inertial confinement fusion program, and laser technology is what allows the etching of chips at 5 nanometers. So like your latest smartphones are actually enabled by something that came out of the inertial confinement fusion program.
Wonderful. I'm going to go to Senator Barrasso real quick, and I'm going to have Senator Cantwell finish up for us.
I wanted to follow up, Mr. Chairman, something that Senator King was asking about Dr. Hsu, and then I'm going to ask Dr. Mumgaard to comment on it. So how does the department plan to execute initiatives focused on commercialization of fusion technology? Because as Senator King said, how do we carry this out? And does it make sense for the department to execute these activities?
Yes, thank you, Senator. So I mentioned earlier, well, many of us mentioned the milestone-based program. That is a key component, not the only component, but that is an organizing program that tries to align the public and private and to develop the toward a fusion pilot. Of course, the public sector we are other needs, for example, the enabling technology. To work.
The program is really important. It allows us to say, hey, we've got your back, go build these things, and we're going to help you figure out from them. So the program, which allows, is really important, which has been a huge driver of new innovations.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the important hearing. I really appreciate it. Reiterate my open invitation. Pacific Northwest.
I'm coming.
Go to the,
I am coming.
Go to the National Laboratory and to see all the innovation that's happening, particularly the fusion innovation that's happening. I think we have about 90% private sector investment is been made Tri-City. So we're very about that research that can happen. I've been listening in and out at places in the legislative buildings today, but it's chipped a lot of money on the table. We did not see in the large signed by the president. Do we need to rectify that? What specifically, I heard the next steps for manufacturing. Senator. Senator Wyden worked on this, but we need to get qualifying tax credits. Senator Manchin, R&D investment was at DOE, generation technology. What kind of test beds do we need to do? What kind of thing, manufacturing, thinking perspective. So just want to go down.
I can start. And first, let me just say that I and Undersecretary Richmond are planning to attend Seattle Fusion Week, and we're very excited about that. We stood up a crosscut team in DOE exactly to bring in multiple program equities, including on topics like this, manufacturing, supply chains. These are things that fusion science has not focused on as much. And so we are formulating our plans and priorities here. So I can't say much here, but assured that this is on our radar.
I think one of the things that has just really changed a lot is that high-performance computing is now being used to optimize the way forward, just in the way it's being used in the new space industry, etc. And we need to actually take all the tools that we need for fusion reactors, integrate them, and start innovating in the computer. We just had there's a young woman at Princeton who has just designed
really pretty interesting, and it came just from the computer, and she started optimizing things on the computer, and it's really going to be one of the ways in which we accelerate the pace of innovation, right? This is the great strength of a huge part of the DOE system is computation.
Okay, so more dollars to high-performance computing analysis of reactors.
Of fusion systems,
Of fusion
yes.
systems, yeah. Okay.
So for me, I would note that the U.S. is not participating in the test blanket system program in ITER, which is how you close the fuel cycle and generate the fusion fuel. So the U.S. will need to supplement that in some way if they want to be a leader in the fusion economy. The other area which I think requires less investment initially is materials. As has been said, the materials that can stand the radiation environment at very high temperature so that we get very good efficiency of the electricity generation is very important, but also the materials that have to face the plasma itself. And there you can start in the small scale, universities, national labs, and with computational capabilities in parallel with it, then you can move to industrialize it very rapidly. And so this is a key place where I see investment worldwide is needed to make progress in fusion.
Is there anybody leading that right now on the material science side?
There is work ongoing in the UK, certainly. There's work in Europe that I know about. But in the U.S., the funding has been quite short, is my experience.
Okay, so since we are very familiar with this, creating a tech center, tech hub in material science specifically focused on fusion.
There's a key part there, which they're having a meeting of EPRI about next week, which is to produce a neutron source that mimics a fusion reactor called a point neutron source in order to test the materials. And there's a meeting, I think it's at Oak Ridge, but I'm not quite sure where the meeting is. I'll be joining via Zoom. But I think pushing that forward, and it was made a priority in the plan that the National Academies put forward to make that test facility.
Okay.
On the manufacturing front, just would like to point out in the pictures here, the two big boxes are actually new factories, Helion in the Pacific Northwest, Commonwealth and Massachusetts, to make fusion components, so actual factories to make pieces. But you know, those are the components we know how to make today. We also need to develop the components for tomorrow. And to the point about the test stands, the idea of let's build the test stands so we can make new materials, things like the neutron source, but let's also get the people that are going to take those results and turn it into an industrial fabrication in that pipeline. Let's get them involved. So those are the metal makers, the foundries, et cetera. So they have a seat at the table when we're figuring out what the materials are, and they can take it immediately from the test stand to scale. And so this goes to the idea of cooperation, not just the test stand, not just the manufacturing. They have to work together. And we think in materials particularly, that's a ripe spot for the U.S. to lead.
Tell me, great, I agree, because we were just at PNNL and saw some of the groundbreaking work that they are doing on new metals. The terminology, I can't think of it right now, but it's pretty breakthrough that is making for, mold injecting technology that's going to be, is being used by the auto industry and others. Just a very cost-effective way to build strong metal for manufacturing. How do you do this industrial pipeline for fabrication? What's the framework? How do you create that, is what I'm saying. Who needs to do something that, so again, is that a center of excellence? Is that a university leading the way in collaboration with the private sector? Is it the Department of Commerce?
Yeah, so from our point of view at CFS, we've been very successful by going to adjacencies. So like we assemble magnets. Well, people that assemble cars can be taught how to assemble magnets, and robots that make cars can make magnets. And so you don't want to, I don't think, start from a blank slate. I think you want to go and say, hey, where are there people that do things that are similar? Let's get them all in a room together, figure out what we need to do, then go and have the resources to try it at some scale that's relevant. Because if it just ends up as a paper report, we don't advance. So a center of excellence, or using a national lab, or building a hub, those I think come after you actually know what you want to do.
So this is the experimentation part. Yes, Professor Crowley.
Sorry, I wasn't nodding my head to say something, but there's a very interesting thing here, which is a sort of one of those valleys of death from development of materials, is that people in universities and small labs make little pieces of material, but actually what you want to know is that in a foundry, you can make steel, for instance, that is what we call low activation steel for a fusion device. It's a special kind of steel, right? And to do that, you've got to do things at probably a national lab type scale, the kind of thing that's going on at PNNL for those kind of materials.
Well, the chairman was very clear about this, that he wanted to see, and I think the ranking member too, that they wanted to see the innovation at the labs who've been successful in some of these things in the past lead the charge. So we're going to look to that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Let me just tell all of you that we've been here almost 2 hours. You can tell the interest and the quality of this hearing that you all brought to us, and we appreciate it very much. We probably could go on for another couple of hours, but we have to go vote. And let me just say we thank you again, and we look forward to working with you in the future. Members will have until close of business tomorrow to submit additional questions for the record. Committee stands adjourned.